Here we are. It says we're live.
Hey.
What's up?
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to Why We Roll.
Yeah, what's up, Chris? We're rolling.
We're rolling. We roll hard. I think.
Do we?
No, I'm not.
Rolling.
What? And what's up, John? Hey,
how's it going?
How's it going?
What an introduction. Yeah, today we are joined by John from 321 Action, as well as Vintage RPG Podcast. Yeah, nice I ran out of introductions there, but yeah, that's a beautiful vintage RPG hat.
You know, for a little while, we actually were making merch. But it was just too. There was two hangups for making merch. One, it was expensive to keep like a Shopify store going with multiple SKUs with multiple sizes, and the other thing was, sure, we could have printed them and mailed them out from our houses, but no one wants to keep stock. Like I played in bands for years, and I will tell you the one of the dirty secrets that no one tells you when you're in a band is that if you buy merch and your band breaks up, you're stuck with all those t-shirts.
It's very true. That's why
you have to wear that t-shirt forever. Sorry, Chris.
I was just going to say that's why for any t-shirts or any merch that I make, I always just do drop shipping because you get less of a cut on the back end, but at the same time, I don't have to have boxes of shirts at my house, and someone else does the shipping. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I've definitely had to have that awkward conversation with people I've been in bands with where it's like, no harm, no foul. It just doesn't work out for whatever reason. But like, hey guys, I'm moving again. You want to take these shirts to your house? I don't really have room. It's like, well, then I have to throw them out. No, shouldn't throw them out. And I'm like, listen, man, I don't care where they go, but they can't stay here.
That's a Goodwill donation just begging to be made.
And that's ultimately what it ends up doing. If you go to like certain Goodwills around like the Passaic County, Bergen County area, there's a whole lot of t-shirts from bands that I've been in from the early 2000s until recently.
I feel like that'd be a cool, weird, like scavenger hunt, like try to find these specific band shirts.
Yeah.
I don't know. I love old band shirts.
Me too.
Well, we can definitely talk merch. And also we should probably mention, so I know that you work on 321 Action with other folks, right? But Vintage RPG also is with Stu Horvath, right? Is that correct? I want to just shout out other folks.
Well, I'm working on the big projects that I work on with two of like my oldest friends, like Stu and I, and George Gio Colazzo, who is my partner in 321 Action, has been my creative partner in everything that I've worked on for like the last 20-ish years. I know them from about the same amount of time, and I know them from like different areas of the same town, and we've just been friends since. Like George actually grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons with Stu and other friends of ours, and so now like the group's commingled, everyone got along, and now like we're going on 7 years of Stu and I doing the Vintage RPG podcast. Stu started the Instagram Vintage RPG probably about a year before we started the podcast.
Oh, really?
And I had the idea like, hey, why don't we, there's so much cool stuff here that you're only going to get so many kinds of points across in one like Instagram like diatribe. Why not let's talk about it, and then 7 years later we're still going strong with it. We've got a ton of great patrons. We have a very large listenership, not trying to be that guy bragging, but it ain't bragging if it's true.
Brag away.
We have built a great community around Vintage RPG, and we're very lucky that everyone tunes in every week, and I'm gonna knock on wood that they keep tuning in. But no, we're having a blast with it. And then during the pandemic, I finally had that moment where it was kind of like a shit or get off the pot moment. Oh, can I work blue? Are we allowed to curse here?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. Well, I had this shit or get off the pot moment where I realized that like I've always wanted to write, and I never could like get my shit together long enough to write. And I'm like, well, what a great opportunity. I can't go anywhere. So I started working on 321 Action, and George came along a few months after because it was important to me that I got it done before I like really presented it to him, because I've said for years, like George writes. George has novels and stuff done. He's been writing for years. He's an exceptional writer. But I was like, I want to write this book. And we'd go to Gen Con and we'd go to writers conventions together and like all these things. And I'd be like, I'm going to do it. And I never did it. So I had to prove to myself that I could do it before I'd be willing to show it to him and bring it to him. So thankfully I did. And I brought it to him, and, he had like the genius idea, because initially, For those who aren't familiar with 3-2-1 action, it runs off a single D10. You're going to roll at or below your stat. Any kind of penalty or bonus is based off of 1, 2, or 3, and you add that or subtract that from the dice roll. We've got a mechanic called fill the plot hole in 2 sentences, where if you say fumble your roll or you don't think you're going to be able to pull off the challenge that we're giving you, the game runner will say, hey, fill the plot hole in 2 sentences. How do you know how to fly an attack helicopter? And you go, one summer I got mono real bad, and I logged a lot of hours on a flight simulator. Problem solved. The penalty goes away. And that's essentially 3-2-1 action in a nutshell. It was going to be a D100 system, but George was like, we can make it more elegant, because the key is that we wanted to make it simple and accessible for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, the most accessible dice I know is the D6, but the D10 is so cool. And, knowing, watching my goddaughter, who's George's daughter, growing up during the pandemic, learning her ABCs and 1, 2, 3s from Sesame Streets and other shows, I was like, yeah, most people can count to 10. And simple addition, subtraction from 10 feels good for everybody. So when George was like, hey, buddy, let's drop the 0. I was really bitchy about it at first, because, I'm that like friend who's like, hey, buddy, have a Snickers. But then once I have that Snickers, I'm like, oh man, you're right about this. And things are great. But that's George and I's relationship. I should have a Snickers, and then I usually give in. Thank you. That is correct.
Vex coming in hot.
D10 is definitely better. I got one right over here. But yeah, so I've been playing D&D. I've been playing games with George and Stu 20 years or so.
Oh, that's incredible.
Nice.
I will say, kind of as an aside, but anyone who's not following Vintage RPG on Instagram, you definitely should. It's one of my favorite accounts. Not saying that because you're on here, but just because I've been following y'all on there for years. And it's such a great source for images, for inspiration, for quips. I mean, yeah, y'all really, you nailed the format on Instagram. Feels really good.
I can't take any credit for that. That's 100% Stu.
All right, Stu nailed the format.
But I mean, so a couple things here definitely to consider is like Stu nailed the format. He figured it out. Just recently released the book Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground, a tabletop guide from D&D to Mothership. It essentially runs the entire gamut, with limited exceptions, from the inception of tabletop RPGs all the way through 2020. I think he finally is like, I have to cut it off somewhere. 2020 feels like the right spot. So he released that through MIT Press. And then, he had an idea recently, and I definitely agree with this. I don't know about the execution for everybody, but for him, it works. When it comes to social media, as you know, the algorithm sucks, right? And it becomes harder and harder to keep engagement going with your audience. So he decided to go back old school. He started a website. So we've always had vintagerpg.com, right? And so now vintagerpg.com, he's migrating the entire feed over there. So it's still going to post on Instagram, but you'll also have an experience over at vintagerpg.com. You could look at it on your desktop. The pictures will be bigger. And so when the algorithm decides they're not going to show you anything anymore unless you're paying for it, there's still a great way to view Vintage RPG. So follow the Instagram, check out vintagerpg.com. And if you haven't already, buy Stu books. It's wherever books are found.
Yeah, it sounds like Tumblr also. The idea of kind of taking the Instagram, what's good about Instagram, and going back to, wider display, a little more interactivity, different things you get from a desktop environment. And we were talking recently with our friends at the Maniculum podcast, who are big on Tumblr, with sort of medieval stories and the touch points between actual medievalism and sort of the Dragon game. And they were sort of singing the praises of going back to, basically getting off the bigger social media platforms and looking at just like, what is the experience you want to curate. So I appreciate that you and Stu, sounds like especially Stu, have put a lot of thought into this work. And I will say, as like someone who I look at that stuff mostly as sort of a historian, anthropologist of this particular aspect of nerd culture, stories, imagination-based stories. And it's really interesting to see how things have evolved. It's fascinating. Like, love it, hate it, whatever. It's just interesting to have that kind of archive and to see different, pieces of it unearthed, in a regular way.
And it's important too, I think, because there is so much historical value to tabletop RPGs. And, I don't know how old you guys are. I'm 45. I know, look, I'm 28. Thank you for noticing. It's very kind of you. But one thing I do know is that when I was a kid, technology hadn't moved that quickly. until one day it suddenly was all here. Like you went from like the Atari to the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, things like that. You went from like cassettes to CDs, and then like, you know, everything was just going faster and faster and faster to the point now where things that should be considered historically sound and things that are worth talking about become ephemera. Right, they're off into the ether as fast as they appear. So it's genuinely hard to slow things down. That's why, like, I applaud Stu for, and it's going old school. Like it's not like going old school. It's like, you know, just out at like Angel Fire GeoCities. That's how far he's going back, but like an actual website, you know. So it's cool, and it's good that he's actually got a book.
Yeah,
because there's some kind of physical anchor to a world that came before. Full of friends hanging out, having good times, rolling dice, and, you know, making weird jokes.
Yeah, I mean, there is something nice about having that physical object as opposed to it being completely digital, because there's weird dilations with time that happen, right? Whether it's like just technology logarithmically speeding up or anything like that. But yeah, we do lose things very quickly.
Yeah, seriously.
And it's one reason people like the hobby, and especially the physical aspect of it, which I didn't appreciate as much, being this forever GM who was buying more and more stuff as PDFs, reading as PDFs, working on my computer, running games off my computer. And when I went to make books, I thought, okay, well, it doesn't really matter about the physical side. You know, what people are going to want is the rules, the stories. But no, what people want is a nice book. And I think it's for this reason that we live in this sped up digital world. And so it's nice to, if you're going to play imagination-based games, you're going to connect with friends, even if you are frankly doing it mostly through a screen, you know, as a media, you know, way to mediate that experience. You still might both want the actual physical book because it's cool and it makes it more real. So I do think there's something in the zeitgeist right now with kind of going backwards and looking at how people made these books often very cheaply and crappily. So they're kind of falling apart. And all, I mean, I have all my old stuff have been unearthing. And so it's kind of funny to see in a generation. I'm 40. I just turned 40. So I think, so, you know, it's sort of like thank you. Like older millennials, you know, kind of saying, all right, you know, I grew up with it. I still got it somewhere in a storage unit, maybe, or you can go buy some stuff pretty cheap online. Yeah. And what if these books hold up? A lot of them, a little problematic, but a lot of them gems, you know, and it's just, there's kind of a weird mix. And I think the digging through the crates, like I was thinking of the hip hop metaphor, even though I don't like spin vinyl, but I mean, it's such a part of hip hop, right? Finding samples and ideas from the past sonically that you wouldn't find if you only listen to pop music now, whatever the now is. I think there's something interesting there too with storytelling. So anyway,
I think that's also especially true in the age of Spotify. And I mean, it's all going towards digital ephemera, right? In kind of the same direction.
Yeah.
I think I told Wythe this the other day, but so John, I'm 38, a little bit younger, but
awesome.
I started playing TTRPGs in 1999 or maybe 2000 with the third edition of D&D. And I was at one of my local game shops the other day, and the guy that runs it was like, oh, I just got this big crate of RPG books. Do you want to take a look at it? And I was like, yeah, hell yeah, I do. And right on top was a very, very torn up, well-loved third edition player's handbook. And I just immediately was like awash in nostalgia, and like holding that physical object again was such a powerful feeling. But it was poorly made and it was falling apart, but it's still good.
Oh, yeah. I mean, not everyone took such great care of them. My thing is, and Stu and I often talk about this, the genuine pleasure of when you buy an older RPG product and you saw some kid wrote their name on the inside cover or on like that first page. And you're like, you know, because that's what we had to do back then when we were like little kids. You have to write your names inside your books in case you lose them, whatever. But like, I was like, oh man, this was Bob's against the Giants. Like it's something like, and then like, you know, your fantasy book in it in your head, or even better. Oh my God, even better when you find someone's old character sheets left like within the pages.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh man. Like you're just, it just, my mind sparks to life when I think about like the adventures this dude, some random dude who I've never met, you know, maybe living, maybe dead. I don't know. Hopefully they're living, but like, you know, had with their friends. And like, this was like their character. This is probably like years of their life, like devoted to this guy. And this dead paper soldier just left behind, you know,
this wounded
and often
soldier.
the names are written in lightning bolts or something, you know, there's some sort of like squiggly, cool calligraphic font. There was that at like yearbook kind of culture of like the attention to your signature and what you put in other people's books. And
it's something special. And I mean, you can't get it with the PDF. You know, I was thinking about this the other day, music, right? I was getting ready for a barbecue and I was flipping through my Apple Music and Nerf Herder came on and I actually put the whole album on. It's a ridiculous band from the 90s.
Yeah, I remember
Very
Nerf Herder.
You remember Nerf Herder, you know. It's very dated. There definitely some stuff in there that's very of the time, but like there's something that's so special about that album to me. Because when I was younger and you were driving around, like you couldn't just bring up a million songs. You couldn't like just speak aloud to your phone. We didn't have like cell phones. You couldn't speak aloud to a phone that was in your pocket that would suddenly play like, you know, Bad Religion or whatever else you want to hear, or like flip the song, or like I've heard this song too many times. Like you had to live with media.
Mm-hmm.
You had to, like, there was intention to taking a CD out, or even cassettes, and the things that you had to do to really absorb entertainment, right? And that's why, like, I think it's, you know, coming back to your point, why like books, you know, like people really want like something nice that they can hold in their hand. Some people, you know, cool, they only want to do PDFs, and that's great, but the PDF has to look just as good as that book, because that book's got to pop. Because now, like, everything costs so much more, and if you want to have that same kind of intentional experience of consuming that media, you got to deliver something that looks great, that's going to look good on a bookshelf, that's going to feel good in your hands, that's going to have stuff cover to cover that is going to make you pop. And you know, when you bring that to your table, you know that that's going to make your group also go, oh yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, and this might be a spicy take for you. I don't know, you might agree, but it feels like, having grown up playing these games, there was some diversity for sure in the 80s, 90s, but it feels like the games, with the OSR, and especially, you know, folks are coming to call the NSR, like recently have gone through this great Cambrian explosion of evolution of ideas. And I think it's also stepped up the game now, having spent more time in the trenches here with like graphic design and thinking about the number of amazing illustrators, the number of just cool ideas, reference points, people drawing more and more from, like, frankly, to me, just obscure anime, like things I've never seen, but then reproducing it in the RPG environment. It really works. They're really cool touchstones for adventure and just like kind of eldritch encounter that aren't always the same, you know, nice hand-drawn picture of a druid from the 60s or whatever, right? Yeah. So I think we've seen also a sort of general, you know, rising tide of stepping up game and making available more tools. We just talked actually with Vex, who's in the chat, about like Canva and some more tools becoming that are either free or cheap, you know, competitors to people having to buy the Adobe suite or take, you know, college level courses. So I think that's also something that you're speaking to, is people do want the physical product still. They do want them to be high quality, and there's more knowledge and more interest there. Even then, when at least for me, when I was buying the expensive, nice books in the 90s, and frankly, the quality wasn't always there, even with, you know, some team of professional designers. So it's interesting to see what smaller, leaner, you know, the indie vibe can really bring some pretty high quality. That's at least where we try to like Venn diagram.
Well, I mean, that's the beauty of like the punk rock ethos, is that everyone's hungry, no one's making money, but you're still going to get up off the bench every day and try to put out the best product possible that makes you feel alive. That's the beauty of creation, is that, like, you know, a lot of things that people don't really, I think, take into consideration when they think about people who create music, who write books, write plays, who are actors, you know, people who are in the entertainment field. And I call it the entertainment field because it's a very broad description for people who are in the arts, essentially, who may not feel like artists per se, but the things that they do and they will commit to are going to bring, like, you know, that little spark of life to everyone who gets to experience it. So with that, let me just preface my next statement by saying, fuck AI art.
Yeah,
like right off the bat.
Agreed.
I think that I appreciate things like Canva. I appreciate things like Grammarly. I mean, like, and granted, AI isn't everything. AI, like, I don't know anyone who's taken an anti-AI stance so hard that they're going to raw dog out spell check on a work email. You know what I mean? Like, AI isn't everything, but there is still has to be consideration for what it means to take from artists when it's not yours.
Yeah.
There has to be consideration for, you know, the people who have worked their asses off to get great at the things that they do, or even just maybe aren't perceivably great, but they got so much heart, they get up and they do it every day. We shouldn't steer the ship towards things that take away from that. And I think that, you know, AI art is definitely a thing that is an existential threat to a lot of creators out there. And I think it needs to be approached as such, but also understanding that like, hey, like, you know, it's Canva is okay. You know, you're learning, you're able to learn basic graphic design from Canva. Also, if you want to get away from Adobe, Affinity right now is like 50% off, just as like a up yours to Adobe. But like,
that
you know,
is good to know because I'm sick of paying that subscription fee.
yeah. I just saw a buddy of mine posted about it, but like, I definitely think that it's important to know that like we're seeing a renaissance, I think, in not just RPGs and specific types of RPGs. I think we're seeing a renaissance in people who are now like, okay, I can do this too. Like I can create, like I can write. And my stories are valid just as much as everyone else's. Like I may not be a person who is like a comic book level artist talent, but man, I still think my shit rocks. And there are other people who like see it and go, oh man, that looks pretty cool, because art at the end of the day is subjective, right? Yeah. And that, granted, there are things that are objectively awesome, but like, you know, why not get up to the plate and take a swing?
Well, and you're getting back, I mean, to bring in, you know, the philosophy to it, that, I mean, you know, so excuse us if I feel like Chris and I can go down these tangents, but that's why I like to do podcasts.
That's what we're here for.
You know, when Benjamin's talking about the aura, right? So art has this aura of the maker, of the creator. And you can see that already when Benjamin's writing up through, you know, World War II, and they got marked by Nazis, of course, like so many other great people. But you know, he's talking about the fact that you know, machines are kind of coming for that aura, and you can begin to reproduce things mechanically. This is before the internet. This is before computers, really. So now you can really see that there can be cool images by some sort of universal, as you're saying, these universal design aesthetics about symmetry or contrast or whatever that an AI can produce, but it lacks the aura of a human creator who's making that decision. I think you even see with memes, like crunchy memes versus like the kind of thing that you're allowed to share at any office job that's kind of completely neutered of any real relevance or meaning. You know, it's just somebody being like happy Tuesday or whatever. And so I think you're starting to see like, that more that punk rock, like people trading almost like not the best art or stories or systems or books or whatever, while at the same time, you also have this rising tide of quality. And I think that's an interesting place to be in, where you can have a lot of different works sorting out, a lot of niches and audiences being found, hopefully. And it's kind of becoming cheap enough where hopefully more and more people feel they can create. They're authorized to create, as you're saying. Affinity, hey, check out Affinity. I guess that came up also. Effects, I feel like. So I know that we should probably move away from Adobe. It's just we're used to it, and it's
so hard.
But the licensing.
I know the licensing is terrible.
Yeah.
I've been using Creative Suite, or like, you know, whatever the equivalent was of it in the early 2000s for 20 years. And so like, it's tough to move away. They hook you. But I do, you know, I think, there's a really generative rising tide. There's also just more accessibility now.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, that's the one thing I'll say about Canva. And as Vex pointed out in our chat, it does have AI now. That does suck. But the fact that you can access it from your web browser, that you can do a layout, and then it can, you know, nudge you along a little bit. Not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, dude, I use Canva every day. I love Canva. Nice. You know, and I like that my eye, which is, it's like, is that straight or not? A little line pops up and goes, that's not straight, dog. Just kick it a little over to the left. Like, I think some things like that are cool, and I love the idea of Canva because it is really accessible for people. Like, dude, if you have a computer that works, you can use Canva.
Yeah. Like,
so that gives a lot of people the ability who maybe would not be able to afford a lot of crazy creative things. You can lay out a whole A5 RPG in Canva. Like, there, you can have your start in kind of graphic design by using things like Canva. And I think that's great. You know, and to the point we were talking about before with like, you know, maybe I can't write so good. Maybe I can't draw that well, but that's okay. Because if you put that product out there, the cool thing, I think, and I think you guys will both agree with me on this about RPGs, is the end product, the actual truest end product of an RPG, doesn't belong to the creator because it's what happens at the table. So like, you know, me and Gio can do our damnedest and put out like 100-page awesome looking RPG with killer art and a killer story and all this awesome stuff that's happening in it. But in the end of the day, like, you send your baby off to school and hits the table, and that game runner, those players, and it'll be a different experience for every single group. Like, that is cool to me. And that's, to me, like one of my favorite parts about RPGs is that, like, as long as you can get it out there, the end result will always be so much more impressive than everything that you put into it.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
It's you know, it's the thing that you hear in art school over and over again. Also, as an illustrator, thanks for saying fuck AI art. Feels good. It always feels good to hear it. Doesn't matter who says it. It always feels good. But you know, you hear that thing through art school where it's like, oh, well, you know, you put your art out into the world. It's not yours anymore. You have to let it go. You have to practice this releasing of it. And I feel like that is most true in RPGs, because you're creating a framework for people to tell stories within, and really the end product is the friends we make along the way.
There you go, 100%.
Or stories you'll never hear, right? Which is kind of cool to think about. Because even like you think about people doing different versions of Shakespeare or whatever, but like it's some version of the story, even however remixed or retold. Whereas with RPGs, it's like you're creating these engines for storytelling, and then if you're successful, the vast majority of the actual instantiations, you know, the actual things are going to be somewhere else. You don't know, you're not in that basement, you're not in that Discord server, whatever. And I do think that's cool, and that is a different way to sort of think about art. So it's more functional, it's more design, it's more engineering than sort of fancy pants fine art, where you know you might want to have more control. Or writing a novel, right? It's so much of it is your head, your feelings. Not to diss those things, I love those things too. But, you know, it's a different thing.
Oh yeah,
just different experiences.
Yeah. And a different experience of, like, you know, you have what happens from cover to cover in a novel, but you also have your way of interpreting it, right? I like an RPG enjoyment to be in a band. Like, you know, sure, they were like X amount of us who created this thing together, but now when you take it over, everybody's in the band. Anyone at that table is now in the band, because they're taking it, they're interpreting it their own way, they're playing their parts. Like, you just essentially you built the framework, and now you have an orchestra.
And that's how you get a party full of bards, which no one really wants. No.
Nobody wants. As cool as you think it might be, it's a joke you could only tell once, and it's something that you can't take too far.
It's a one-liner. It's got a very limited lifespan.
Well, I think this is a good transition. I have all these thoughts from Stillfleet campaigns about you know, the evil bard in the game we have effects, or like Ian did Oops All Hell Scientists, which was real weird. So the weirdest class, everyone's a mutant with psychic powers, everyone's a Tetsuo or whatever. But I really want to ask John about you and your work. So, you know, it sounds like music was really important to you, and maybe they're sort of before you were making RPGs, sounds like you were playing them. But I want to ask about the sort of origin story of 321 a little more. So you said you made it with your buddy George, and you had this idea for D100. You brought it even down to a D10. We love, by the way, because obviously our game is D12, D10, D8, D6, so it's that range of dice. So I'm a big fan also, as opposed to D100s and D20s, where you have this huge range, and D6s where you have a little tiny range. A
little bit.
So yeah, a little bit of D6 in there, but I think it's interesting to ask, like, how did you go from, okay, I have an idea for a system, I love playing these games, and you know, love some punk aesthetic. I've thoughts about that too, but how do you go to, okay, all right, I want to make like lots of games. Like, you've produced a lot of books for 321 Action, so I'd love to hear, you know, what brought you to bring it to the world in a wider way, and maybe make it more of a business. Because I mean, let's face it, it's really cool for people who are putting out one or two games for free or for their friends. But it is, at some point, if you're going to print stuff, if you're going to pay artists, I mean, you know, you have to run it as a business of some kind. So I'm always curious kind of how other creators decide to make that leap, and what that's like for them.
And also, maybe if I can scoot in before we get into that, what is 321 Action?
So 321 Action is it's a tabletop RPG. And the idea is that you are telling cinematic stories in your own way. And, you know, I grew up watching a lot of TV and movies, I still do, reading comics, reading everything. And I'd often come across these RPGs that were like, let's say, licensed RPGs for like different, you know, properties. And they're like, I want to do this. And then you can never actually do the thing that you want to do, you know. So like you get like and I'm not going to name names, but like think of your favorite TV show involving brothers who hunt monsters, and you want to just keep it as simple as possible. But suddenly you have to roll all these dice to try to do like one thing. And I don't want that. And I never wanted that. And most people I'd encounter, the big hurdle for them to get into RPGs was like, which dice do I roll? First and foremost. And then looking at these long ass character sheets and just what do I do now? How do I do this? And here we're like, look, you have 6 stats. Add or below, add or subtract, Bob's your uncle. And just tell us what you want to do. So if you are like, hey, my buddy and I were in a combat, he's really strong, I want to do the fastball special, which for those who are listening or watching who may not be familiar with the X-Men, it's when Colossus takes Wolverine and throws him at the bad guys, claws first. So I was like, okay, cool. You do that and then just roll your damage. Like, we don't even make people roll to hit. You just roll for damage.
Oh, wow.
That's it. Everything automatically hits. You get 2 attacks or a special ability. And try to do the coolest thing that you want to do. You know, I've had people who were like, okay, so there's a big monster. They're attacking my friends. I want to get on the ground and I want to run around them in a circle and then tie their legs off like an AT-AT and get them to trip into this lava pit. All right, cool. And I make an action check to make sure you don't like trip and fall as you're running in circles. Boom, done. You know, you don't really need to roll for most things unless it's something that is outside of like, all right, you want to run full speed and hop like this 6-foot fence. I'm going to make you roll for it. But like, you know, if you want to just run, jump, do whatever, like just do it. Just tell me what you want to do, you know, make it fun, you know? And that's the thing. My goal and our goal is to always make sure that everyone has their hero moment. You know, the thing that lets them walk away from a game and go, fuck yeah, I did that. And like get them excited to play the next one because they got to do the cool thing. And I mean, I think you guys will both agree if you've played any kind of fantasy RPG, right? You have that cool thing. You're like, I can do this. Or that cool thing that your guy can only do. And then you have to wait at the tail end of the initiative for someone to like, hopefully not kill the monster in time for you to get to do that cool thing. Or like in like something like 5e, where everyone can kind of do a little bit of everything, someone kind of like beats you to it. And you're like, you're not even a spellcaster. Like, you know, it's like, it sucks. So
everybody's a spellcaster in 5e.
Everybody. And so we give you the ability to like, you know, good guys go first, bad guys go second. Work as a team. This is your scene. What do you want to do? Oh, well, you know, I want to do this. I want to do this. And while they're doing that, I want to do this. Okay. Everyone roll your damage. I'll tell you how it goes. That's it. Keep it simple. And that's what 3-2-1 action is. It's a way to tell any kind of story that you want to tell in a way that makes everyone have a good time and gives them the freedom to do the things they want to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What were your questions again?
Oh yeah. Well, no, I think that's good. It's good to step back, Chris, and be like, what is this mysterious game in case people have not heard. But yeah, I mean, I was just curious kind of how you went from what the process was like, because I imagine it's not, you know, either or, right? But as you're developing a system, play testing it, beginning to work with a good friend, thinking about explaining it to more people, maybe running it at cons, running it for more friends, wider circles. So how do you go to from there to a few years later, you have all these sort of zine length, some are a bit longer, but you know, you have a bunch of books, they're sort of charming format and they're very action movie driven and they're very driven by different genres. Is that fair to say, John? You know, they're different kinds of stories.
Absolutely.
Different look, different feel, but they're all this underlying system, and it feels like there's an energy that unites them that is very much, to your point, you know, jump in there and do cool stuff in a specific epic environment, and you don't have to sort of learn a bunch of rules or level up or have that traditional orientation of the first level dragon game character who's carefully picking, you know, cantrips and whatnot.
Yeah. So I don't know if I did it the right way, but what we do is, you know, George's my best friend in the entire world. Like, no one in this world I love more than that guy. And he is such a smart creator. And on the same page with me when it comes to, we didn't want to do just one thing. Like, we could have been like, okay, we're going to tell this specific kind of story and we're going to do multiples of this book. Like, we didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves in that. So like, you know, Rocket to Russia, the first thing we put out, it's essentially Predator with the serial numbers filed off. You're on a mysterious island. Wackiness goes afoot, and we could have just done another one just like that and another one just like that, and like built an entire world out of one type of story. But what we chose to do instead is like, we like a lot of different stuff, so we built a world, but we built a world out of a lot of different stories and different genres that, like, you can play any one of our games and not have played anything else and not worry about it. But if you're playing different stuff, you'd be like, oh, wait, we are in this world. This is here. This is here. Like, it all does exist. It's essentially our world, but fantasy.
Right.
You know, all different types of fantasy. So, yeah, we did Predator. We did the second one, Escape from Point Nemo, is essentially Gilligan's Island gone far, far worse, with more monsters and survival horror. We did Children of Uma because, you know, George loves Mad Max. I mean, who doesn't love Mad Max? So we did an honest to goodness vehicle battle RPG. And at the same time, it's the only time we've ever done this where we followed up. We did 2 books at the same time. We did another zine, a zine sequel to it called Mini Submania, where it's essentially a James Bond spy thriller. You got to break into an undersea laboratory, kind of like halfway between Metal Gear Solid and Batman Arkham Asylum, where you could either go stealth or you can go running and gunning, and you got to break your buddy out of an undersea prison. We did horror. We did The Devil in New Jersey, which is my love letter to being a young punk rock kid in New Jersey and the Pine Barrens and the Jersey Devil and all that cool stuff. And we did a mini golf adventure. We did an honest to goodness. I had to come up with miniature golf rules that would work within the framework of 3-2-1 action and running off a single D10. And I managed to pull that off. And that's an honest to goodness kids book. Like you could play it with like your 8-9-year-old nieces, kids, you know, whoever, and feel comfortable doing it because it's completely like safe for them to play. Did a holiday adventure with historical figures. We did 4 pamphlet adventures, and now we're in the process of finishing up our 13th adventure, The Hotel Exorcist. So get that out to get that out to the backers.
Classic. Yeah, I mean, you really get to hear from your snippets, you know, your love of to me, you know, pop cinema, but like at its best, like, you know, Predator. I mean, it's hard to imagine the people try to make versions of these movies today, but both the schlockiness, the sincere schlockiness of the height of the 80s, the Cold War, but also like just there's sort of auteurship, you know, where directors would go off with smaller budgets than you'd have nowadays, making a Fast Furious kind of, you know, triple-digit $1 million movie. And you're just going off in the woods and you're trying to get this guy who barely knows English at the time, you know, to hold the machine gun right and have another guy in a suit who's going to be green screen, be invisible, kind of chasing at him. And it's sort of like lends the, like that idea of the aura. So I think there's something interesting about translating that to RPGs. Yeah. And I love that even mini golf, like I love mini golf, and I love the idea that, okay, let's make it equally as epic as Predator. So there's an alien chasing you hide of the Cold War, or, oh my God, there's the double windmill. I have to get the double windmill. So how do I, like, you either way, like you said, okay, it's got to be a D10. You're adding or subtracting a small number, whatever it is. It's an interesting design challenge, and I think it does give the reader a sense that it is, as you say, it's one world, it's one modern world, but it's very, very different takes, and you could easily make up your own campaigns too, right? I mean, I assume that's something you want people to do with this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in our rule book, we put the build your own character at the very end, because in the books that we give you 6 to 8 pre-generated characters, fully, you know, a basic snippet of what you need to know about them, the weapons, what they can do, and then you can go off your own way with it. Like, you know, the thing that we like to give people with action is, if you buy the book, it's like a playable novella where you can actually read the book as the game runner and have a really enjoyable experience reading a cool story. If you want to be a first-time person running a game, you're not really sure about how story works, you could run it A to B. Everyone's going to have a good time. If you want to run it your way, you've got pre-gen characters, maps, art, charts, everything you possibly need inside of this world, a shit ton of lore. Pull it out, run it your way, and have fun with it. But there's no leveling in 3-2-1 action. Like you have luck points instead of hit points, and you could spend your luck points if you blow a roll to kind of make a challenge roll. You can't adjust damage, but say if you're swinging from a jungle vine over a pit of lava and you slip on that next vine, you could spend the difference between what your failure was, or you can wait and see what happens if you fall in a pit of lava. So we give you freedom to be able to do that. We also do a thing where you have guts penalties. So for luck points are for things that make you bleed. Guts are for things that would do bodily harm to you, like, you know, twisting your ankle, tearing your ACL, getting in a car accident, eating a bad burrito, things that may not kill you outright per se, but they're going to make your day-to-day. Having a bad hangover. If anyone's had a bad hangover, you know how hard it is to try to get through A to B during the day. So
and just be a person.
And just be a person. So if you get three guts penalties, your stats drop by 1, 4, you die. So multiple different ways you could die badly in 3-2-1 action, but we try to balance it out where you know, if you want to create a character, you can. You're not beholden to using our characters, but because we provide you with so much in the books as is, we don't really put. And since there's no actual way to level up your characters, like you can have no max of hit points, of luck points. Like you can keep getting lucky and keep getting stuff that will get you start with 20, you could end with 40, but you're not going to level up in the books. They're really for like run and gun style adventures. And we do a thing too with cool. We have cool penalties where, you know, a lot of people like me struggle with mental health. And so having insanity mechanics in a lot of games is somewhat off-putting in a way.
Sure.
Because in a lot of ways, it makes a person who struggles with their mental health, it implies that there's a weakness there. Right. So what we did in horror was we did cool penalties where if you get 3 cool penalties, your stats drop by 1, makes it harder for you to do stuff, because it's not so much that you're weak, but now like I know if I'm getting chased through the woods by a dude in a hockey mask, I'm 1, hoping I'm not wearing khakis, 2, struggling with my keys trying to get in the damn door to try to escape this guy. So it's going to make it harder for you to do stuff. But at the same time, I could turn around, I could try to find a weapon, and I could stand my ground and feel strong enough to do that.
Yeah, it's like literally losing your cool.
You're just losing your cool,
Yeah.
but your weapon damage is still the same. So I could still like whack him upside the head with a log, and I'll still do just as much damage, but I'll have brown pants. You know, like we want to make everyone feel powerful and strong, and give them the opportunity to have the hero moment, but also make it challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is an anecdote I've said, but just I think it's funny because I grew up playing Call of Cthulhu along with D&D and Vampire, and I loved that idea. I loved all these stories about, you know, Eldritch horror and going mad and madness in space, you know, the intersection of sort of science horror. But then when developing Stillfleet, you know, I spent all this time researching like, okay, so know a little about, I've like taught the history of psychiatry. I've also, you know, I've like been to a therapist, right? It's like, all right, what would this really be like? And you research it, and it just was like not fun. And that's also something players were saying is like, you know, I actually don't need that. I don't need like insanity points. And so pretty quickly we like kind of cut that and made it more of these optional. It was all to say it was a better design constraint to say if something makes you lose your grip on like the laws of physics and time and space, that's not the same as everyday mental health struggles. That should be like actually more like a spell. It should have like a weirder, exactly, a different special case. And that led to more of these sort of Escher-esque events. And it pushed the game in a weirder direction actually to cut that. So
weird is
I
good.
totally hear you. And
weird is good.
You know? But like, I mean, you know, now you're catatonic and you can't play no more. While everyone else is still like very well alive, then you're like, "Well, thanks. I guess I'll go home and
like, go get some nachos." Yeah,
get some pizza. Yeah,
yeah. And I like, as I agree with Vex, you're cutting levels is great. Even though, I mean, there are levels in some of the games I make, but like that's, you know, when you're cutting experience points, you're cutting stuff to track. It's like flattening, but it can be liberating too. And I think of even like James Bond, like, does he gain levels between movies canonically, or is it's kind of flat? He's always a badass, and it's kind of like, how lucky is the guy? Moment to moment. Sorry,
that's
Chris, what were you? Yeah.
Oh no, I just back to the madness thing. I feel like that's a line that I toe with Danse Macabre quite a bit, where it's like, you know, you have the opportunity to go mad, but it is separate from just like everyday mental health struggles. You've died too many times. You can't keep a grip on reality.
That's different. That's
quite
cool.
different.
Yeah.
Well, you have a Cronenbergian body horror thing, which the game's kind of all about, which is, again, it's like pushing it even further into the weird. So it's like if you have tentacles growing out of you, that's again pretty different than most of the anxieties and even and we're, you know, different kinds of struggles that people face.
Right.
So I think again, it reads a little differently. Yeah. Chris, did you have a question? I did want to go back to John, like what, you know, 3-2-1, who's working on that? How did it expand? And what do you see as the vision for the business? But I don't mean to be the only person asking questions.
No, that's great. It's just me and George. And you know, we have an editor named Megan Ball we've been working with since the beginning, who's a friend of my wife. My wife is Sally Canarino. She's a comic book artist. She's done work for Vault. She's done work for a bunch of different companies. Things like Amazon, Human Remains. I Walk with Monsters, cool. Final Girls. Like she's been out. She's been doing these door to door, night by night, which is I think finishing up soon. Like she's been doing a lot of different work for different companies, and also working on RPGs with people. She did the Vorpal Almanac with Levi Combs from Planet X Games. Like So like, she does a lot of work with us as well. And then she actually co-wrote the Sunrise Limited with George and I. And that was her idea. So that was like the first thing that was ever like brought in by someone who wasn't just directly George and I, which was cool. But for the most part, like we write everything because we fund through Kickstarter. I've had the privilege to hire like at least 11 different artists on every book, with the exception of one. Zach Giolongo did all the art for how's the name of that book? I wrote a bunch and I can't remember the name of the book. Hard Times on the Back Nine, our mini golf adventure. He did all the art for that, but otherwise we generally have about 10, 11 different artists. We try to bring new ones in here and there, but we as we bring in new ones, we still support the old ones who've been with us from the start. I love being able to have money to pay people to draw monsters. Like it's like my favorite thing of the world. Like the coolest thing about what we do is that it's not just George and I getting our shit in. It's the fact that like we get to raise up a lot of other creators. We get to bring creators that maybe some people normally would never see or maybe not give a shot to, put them on the map and put them in places that are visible for people to see them and hire them out. Like I've definitely had artists that we brought on that were like, people are like, oh, can we get them? And I'm like, just shoot them an email. If they like to work, they like to draw monsters and they will take your money. Like I like giving a platform to other people, because our books are only as great as the people we get to collaborate with. Like otherwise just me and George, like, what we should do? We should do this story and then just spinning our wheels.
Yeah. Well, that also goes back to, kind of the, why is that word coming to mind? Just like punk rock roots again, right? Yeah. Like we're all lean, we're all hungry. We all need to eat, but we also need to support each other. And
it's no fun if only one of us wins. I want all the ships to rise. I want everyone to do great. I want the people who are working hard out there to be able to have their work recognized while they're alive and kicking and have the opportunity to make more great work. Because if you support people who do cool shit, you give them the opportunity to make more cool shit.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm laughing at Vex's comment.
Yeah, that's no, and I actually, that's funny. I wrote down today in a notebook, I was thinking of ideas for Why We Roll, and I was like, man, we should do a whole one on cooperation and co-opetition versus competition. Or, it's like how do different creators see at different levels what they're doing, and how do you find people to, spread resources and just keep the kind of party going, but also make it sustainable? Because again, it would be nice to do this more or less full time. And part of that is figuring out the kind of maths of like, how is it sustainable? Like at what rate? And, how do you not avoid, like needing to hyper focus on the product part, and being able to keep doing the fun part, the drawing weird little weirdos, and write crazy venture. Yeah. Draw little freaks and, write lists of extra dimensional madnesses or whatever.
I mean, this is something that's come up on the show over and over again. Like when we were talking to Lex Kim Bobrow, and we were talking to, who else were we talking about? I feel like this has come up a bunch. Don't quote me on this, podcast listeners or streamers. But we've definitely talked about building community and the need for it within the RPG space. Maybe we could do a symposium episode.
Yeah, I mean, that couldn't hurt. And it's important too, because like, coming up in the music scene, it was ruthless. It was cutthroat. Like, we're all brothers. We're a band of brothers. Like we're all in it together. Punk rock. It's a scene. But in the end of the day, like a lot of backstabbing, a lot of like politics going on, because there was only one spot at the top. It's you're fighting for the top of the card, and now it's a blessing and a curse. But there's a lot more equity, I think, spread out across all different types of social media. You're more likely than ever to get eyes on your product now than you ever were. But at the same time, the curse part of it is that you have to do a lot more than just create. Like, back to what we're talking about, the business part of it, dude, all I want to do is write. I don't want to, I don't like, I love having conversations with these. I like doing the podcast. I like doing interviews, but like, I don't want to be like, oh, it's your old buddy Hambone, and like, making myself make a gimmick personality of myself that I've worked very hard to kind of get away from through therapy and sobriety, to bring that monster back to entertain people enough to get them to like to try out the stuff. Like having to be the talking head takes a lot of time away from, and you'll talk to anyone in music about this right now. It's like, I really want to write this other album, but I have to do a TikTok. I have to do like a Facebook post. I have to do this. Like, and the things that you do to make you more connected to the people and the crowd and the audience, a lot of times makes you less connected to the actual work.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, talking about what's the business like, my balance is trying to reconcile that and find a way to do it where like I'm still honoring myself and my ability to be a creator, but also being willing to give enough of myself away to build the audience. So, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm going to start in July doing Tuesday night action. I'm going to do an open action game for people who want to learn how to play action. No restrictions on like, well, you've never played it, you've played it a million times, you've played an RPG, never played an RPG. All materials will be provided. I'm putting up Eventbrite links. I'm working on I was actually working on that this afternoon while I was trying to after work trying to get this set up. You sign up for the day you can do it. So far, every Tuesday for the month of July, and I'm either going to run you through an adventure that's pre-written or I'll whip up something on the fly. But I'm going to show you why action's great. I'm going to show you why you're going to love playing action and give people the opportunity to maybe even try out an RPG for the first time. I'm thinking of starting to do YouTube interviews with different creators, which I think I have 2 right here that I would definitely bring on and talk about their processes as well. Trying to do things that don't break me, so I can break through with what I'm trying to do with action, because we're coming up on 4 years now. The audience is growing, but your audience is never growing at an exponential enough rate to be able to like not have to keep the company alive Kickstarter to Kickstarter.
Right.
Yeah. No, I feel you. It's like I feel like there's 3 faders. Like when I think about renting a compact car to go upstate and like listening to like Portishead or hip hop, and it's like I can never get the mix right with bass, treble, and there's like a middle one that like represents I don't know what else, but there's basically 3 buttons in like the crappy car like EQ. And I feel like it's like when I first did, so I was like, it's coming up probably on 4 years of like really taking it seriously as a project and then moving into a business where making the game and then community building were like up at 10, but the business was at 0. And it was just like, I don't know, we'll do a Kickstarter. And then as I've learned, like, okay, well, you can't like live off that. So you have to like figure out something else. Then like that means the other faders have to go down. Like there is some sort of finite resource, which people tell me is like sleep or something. Allegedly, or like the relationship of your, the people you live with, if you're, a partner or whatever. And so I think that's where I've had to like really balance. And I do wonder, and that's why I think a lot of this show came from, is Chris and I talking about this, like, man, how do you get to do this for a living, regardless of exactly what that means. And seeing that other people seem to be figuring it out, although maybe everyone is, or most people rather, are just kind of in this middle muddle.
Yeah, it feels like we're all in situ. We're all in the process of figuring it out.
Yeah,
but nice thing about the show is being able to talk to folks like you and figure it out together.
A great conversation, and thank you for having me. There is a comedian, writer, does a little bit of everything, named Sarah Benincasa, wrote a book, which I highly recommend. It's called Real Artists Have Day Jobs. And, it's a perspective of, I know, right? It every time, right through the heart. But it's a perspective of like a person's trying to live their mental health struggles, them being out in the world as a person who entertains and, trying to reconcile it all. But like for the most part, like there are very few people out there who get to, I'm doing air quotes here, dear listener, if you're listening to on the podcast, live the dream. Mm-hmm. But the dream still comes with a lot of work. Back in the day, Springsteen once said, they said, well, you made it. What are you going to, must be great. You finally made it. He goes, yeah, you made it. But then what? Like you still have to, if you make it, you still have to show up to work the next day. You still have to go and really do the work that got you there in the first place and find ways to excel at it and then take it to that next level. So, we 4 years coming up, August 8th, I think is our 4th anniversary. As a company, as a business, but like, you do hit a breaking point where you're like, okay, like what's next? And I think that, coming up on 4 years, there is definitely a very real, okay, what's next thought process on the table.
Sure.
Yeah, that's fair, and that's where certainly we're at with kind of thinking about relaunching the flagship game and trying to just have more print, actually get in distributor, which is where we're at, is trying to get somebody else, to that earlier question about stocking, to sell the stuff. Is one piece of it, but I think for everyone, there's these different sort of hurdles. I'll also plug this book. Looks interesting. So Real Artists Have Day Jobs, by Sarah Benincasa. And I think I mentioned on the show before, my friend Liz Stevens wrote a really great book about Jim Henson called Make Art, Make Money. That's a kind of biography. It's like a business school biography of Jim Henson by an artist. It's a very short, weird little book, but same sort of topic, right? Like, how does this work? How do you get to balance different pursuits and not feel stressed out and get burned out, right? Which is the issue. It's not the people I say, like, I don't want to be, or at least in New York, I don't want to be homeless, but it's like, yeah, of course. But before you get to that point, you'll probably just be so stressed out, you'll take a job you hate. It's like the knock-on effects of being stressed.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't really tell you, it's not really like a self-help book in the way that it's going to tell you how to do all that, but it's definitely very relatable on a lot of levels as people who are creatives struggling with dependency issues, mental health issues, the trifecta, what do I got? I'm a creative, dependency, substance issues, mental health issues.
Yep.
The triangle.
ADD, clinical depression.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's always encouraging to find out that you're not alone. And I think it's always encouraging to to kind of have that redefining your idea of success pep talk with yourself every so once in a while.
Right.
Because I think that there is, for me, coming up being like, well, I didn't do this. Like, I wanted to be a musician. I did this, and this, but I didn't get to do this. And then having that, like, kind of talk to yourself, be like, yeah, but I did all that. Like, I still succeeded. I just didn't get to go there. And so, like, a lot of people look at things that they should be looking at as achievements as failures, because they put so much on one specific thing that if I can do X, I will be a success, or if I can do X, I'll be happy. But really, it's the dignity and the privilege of doing the work to get you to X. That's where all the cool shit happens.
Yeah,
that's like well, maybe I didn't get to X, but like, I fucking did that, and that ruled. And I think that it's always encouraging, and something that should be encouraged is getting people to focus on that more than the actual what's at the top of the mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I was just going to say it's feels like a Sisyphean effort in late stage capitalism to do that, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like you have your career, you have this thing that you're trying to achieve, and that's how you're going to make it, and it does force everything else to fall to the wayside, which is I think, and it's pretty sad, really, because the process is where the beauty is.
But like, it's beyond the process too. It's like these plateau of, you get to a point, and as you're saying, because I feel like I felt that, John, where you do something artistically and it's not good enough, what's the next thing right away? And that is a learned mentality. It's also, I think, innate, and it's, like Buddhism speaks to that. Like, can you sit with yourself and be okay with, like, that thing is neither the greatest thing that anyone's ever done, and everyone should just be clapping when you walk to the grocery store, everyone should just burst out into applause, nor is it like, oh, I'm a failure because my book only sold a few hundred copies, not thousands or millions. And it's like those sort of glass half empty, glass half full questions, in addition to the also excellent points about the journey, which, in the chat, okay, so for example, with this idea of dating, right? People have cultural expectations around the correct way to date. I think it's a lot of similar things with writing and art, fine art that I've grown up with. Like, there's only one right way, and it is essentially numeric. And to Chris, your point, it's in our world. It's a culture of entrepreneurship and of likes and follows now. The idea of profilicity. How many followers can you get on your profile? That's kind of your thing. That's the first thing in marketing. I'll tell when people say, okay, how many followers do they have? Like, that's the question you ask of whomever, without going to specifics, in the business world. And it's just like kind of insane at this point, because a lot of it doesn't even make any sense with like robots and whatever now on X. Like, it's all the numbers don't mean anything anyway, but there's still that baggage of like, well, we need a quantum, and that's the quantum we're going to use. And I think there is a different way to do art, especially when it's art about imagination stories with your buds. that is not tied to that. But it's so easy when you're doing it for a few years and you're trying to sell at least some books to cover costs, right? Very quickly it becomes about like, oh crap, we need to move more units. So anyway, congrats on coming up on 4 years. Really, that's a long roundabout way of saying, yeah, congrats.
Yeah, I mean, you know, numbers add up to nothing, right? Like I think that, to the glass analogy, the half empty, half full. I think like the best way to look at it is like, this is the glass I get to drink from, and it quenches me, whether it's half empty or half full. I get the experience of drinking from this glass, and it satisfies me, right? You didn't think you were getting this tonight, did you?
I didn't.
You had a Frankenberry tattoo rolling up, and you got a very different experience planned. But yeah, I definitely think that it comes up on that. But I think there's a lot to be said about, for me, you know, back to the business, it's important to, I'm not looking to quit my day job. I mean, would I love it? Absolutely. I'm not looking for quit your day job money. I'm looking for like life-changing money, where the money that comes in is enough to sustain the business, so I can take the money in my pocket and buy groceries and not have to put any of those extra dollars into making these books, you know? And I think that's a realistic goal, but still hard to attain. You know, when people look at you and they're thinking about representing you and thinking about what you're about, like, you know, oh, how many followers you have, how many, you know, clicks and this and that you get. And I think they're looking at the wrong barometer, because anybody can have thousands upon thousands of followers, but how many people they actually engaged with? And that's why when you look at a Kickstarter, you're going to see these Kickstarters that make a lot of money. And you're like, oh my God, they made so much money. But the number you really want to look at is how many people backed it.
Right.
Because whatever the number is of what they back it, it's just that number times whatever they spent. And now you have the grand total there. So, you know, if you see a Kickstarter that like is doing better than yours, and I think that's the Sisyphus thing, I think is a great analogy. You're constantly pushing the boulder uphill. I think the key thing with the boulder pushing uphill is you don't try to get it all up the top of the hill in one shot. You get it up as far as you can. You find a place to rest, and then you start pushing it again. And I think there's a lot of people who get really bummed out and discouraged when they see these Kickstarters that have like thousands upon thousands of dollars. And you're like, Jesus Christ, like I made like $3,000. This person made like 27, but like, you got to look at what they're selling. You got to look at how much they're selling it for. And you got to look at the number of people who are actually backing it. That's what the audience actually is. That is their audience, not representative of the entire audience, but that's a big chunk of their audience.
Yeah.
And I think when you kind of like adjust your expectations and you take that like step back, you get yourself the bird's eye view, the ground truth, you're going to go, oh shit, I'm not really that far off than anybody else in this hobby. You know, I am doing good work. I haven't gotten to a good enough market position yet, but I'm there. You know, I'm toe and toe.
Yeah. I mean, something we've talked a lot about too is, and I have to shout out, like, for example, Logan Dean, who we started talking to last Gen Con, so not even a year ago, but, and others, and many folks on the server who've been working with us for a while. But, you know, it's not just like moving product or a business strategy, but it's like, well, why? Like, why did you want to do this? What's your goal for the long term? And to your point, John, like maybe it is like you have a day job, but also then you get to print a bunch of cool books that look awesome the way you want, and you don't have to worry about that financially. Because that is actually a big expense, and shipping is a big expense and all this stuff. So, okay, let's say if you could take that expense off the table. Well, what if you could hire just yourself? What if you could hire yourself part-time? Or you could hire an illustrator half-time or whatever. You can kind of divide up success into different units of like how much I can pay a friend who's good at a thing to do that cool thing, draw little freaks, you know, whatever, edit the books so they sound good. They sound like they're written by people who went to, you know, some sort of school and can read good words well. But yeah, I mean, you know, a major piece has just been that refinement of like, what is the mission, you know, like why make games as a company, as opposed to, because that's always the free option of just make games for your friends that are rad and have fun. But if you're going to do some other thing, all right, why are you doing it? And I think that's been really, really useful for us to kind of align on. It's not just because obviously if it was just me personally and not a company, it would just be like Wythe does like crazy shit in my head and I wouldn't worry about anybody else. But it's because even with one other person, it's already like, all right, it's a company. What's our mission? You know, but it's not just a corny activity. It is actually useful to refine like why are we putting all this energy into these
Yeah.
bizarre made up lands? I mean, if you look at even, just Blister Critters and Stillfleet alone, I mean, they're quite weird books. And Chris, hopefully your book, I think it will live up to that level of
I think it's going to be pretty weird.
It's got a lot of tentacles, and it's to Vex's point. Maybe people in, medieval France covered in tentacles, they're like, oh, this is not so bad, actually. Look, I can grab that thing over there. I don't need to move.
It's very useful.
Yeah.
Sorry, French speakers.
Yeah.
And that's what's awesome about this kind of stuff, that you get weird French people covered in tentacles. Which I guess is the broad strokes of I think what your game is about.
That's it. Very broad strokes. But there's definitely medieval people of all stripes, and there's definitely tentacles also of all stripes.
Chris's game is a great OSR inspired game using the grid system, where in the Middle Ages, in the end of the 14th century across the world, but we're focused on from Constantinople to the end of Western Europe. Or I should say Chris's solo authored game, but death dies, death leaves the world, and so when bodies fall, they return with mutations, and over time they become just inhuman monsters. But for a long time, you can just keep dying and coming back with more and more sort of Cronenbergian mutations. So it's a cool, weird game about trying to discover how to bring death back, because to put it in the modern parlance, shit just gets too cray.
Yeah, it gets way too cray.
Society kind of breaks down. So it's kind of a zombie apocalypse religious horror game, but it's, there's no elves, there's no magic, there's just kind of medieval life and Cronenbergian mutation.
You've checked off like 9 out of my 10 boxes. So you said you runs for what system?
It's running off the grit system, which is Wythe's baby that he started with Stillfleet.
Now with Stillfleet in the grit system, you work off of 4 dice, right?
Yeah, so primarily, it's D12 to D6. You could also use a D4. It doesn't come up as much weapon damage, I guess, but you generally are rolling a D12 to D6.
So and for me, for my own thing, are you rolling to hit? How's it like working with the 4 different dice? Do different people roll different dice, or
so each one of your go ahead.
No, go for it.
All right. Yeah. So each one of your, like you have attributes, much like in the Dragon game, much like in a lot of games. So, but each one of those attributes is a die score. Okay. So you're trying to, in most checks or rolls or whatever you want to call them, you're trying to hit usually like a 6 or better. Right. So, if you're rolling a D12, you have a higher chance of rolling that.
Yeah.
But you like set an array during character creation. So you get to choose which die goes into which spot. And then, for Danse Macabre, we also, I kind of borrowed some ideas from Blister Critters as well. They have a thing in there called the bonk mechanic, where you're adding attribute scores to damage rolls at the same time.
Yeah.
So we have that in the game as well. Like different weapons use different attributes to hit. There is a to hit thing. That's something I can't let go of for some reason.
I listen. I get that completely.
Yeah. But then, you also add the relevant attribute that you use to hit with the weapon to your damage. So it's big damage. It's very like fast, deadly combat, things like that. But also like trying just to navigate a weird world that's become weirder still.
See, I love that. And I love the idea of people taking systems and because like you created the system for a very specific thing, but now people take that system and they find ways to adjust it to fit within the world that they're creating. And now it takes that system idea and kind of turns the idea of it on its ear.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because now you're like, okay, I can take this system, like a lot of people use what's it called? Powered by the Apocalypse. People for a hot second were using that a lot. A lot of people are using Into the Odd now.
Yeah, like Knave and Karen are all kind of based on Into the Odd, but kind of not at the same time.
It's like a hack of a hack of a hack, but you keep finding ways to hack systems to make it work within the world that you build. And I think that's something it's very special about the creation of tabletop RPGs is that, for the longest time, it was like, D20 standard array, Bob's your uncle. But now it's like, okay. And right there with you, like letting go of like to hit, it was hard for me to let go of the D20 because that's like, that's like the first, that's like the first thing, like that's the first chord you learn is the rock itself. But finding ways around that I think is always an interesting thing. Like, so to that point, I was asking you about the 4 dice because we have something, we use those 4 dice as well. I don't know if you're familiar with Neon Lords of the Toxic Wasteland.
I know that one actually.
A little bit, yeah. Why don't you give us a plug? Because I think you have a new project, right?
Yeah, Brian Shutter is a genius. Full stop. Like, just Neon Lords is, if you imagine like an 80s and 90s mixtape that Lisa Frank made while dropping acid to Black Sabbath.
Say less.
During RoboCop, you know, like, and like, you know, while reading a He-Man Master of the Universe comic, that's what Neon Lords is. It's very similar to BX, but like, it is a fever dream of all your favorite things, with amazing art. And so I had an idea for a zombie adventure that George, we talked about it. He's like, it doesn't really fit in with how action works. So I was shooting the breeze with Brian at a convention down in Baltimore, and I brought it up to him, and we kind of started riffing. So we're going to do the zombie adventure. It's called Brain Eaters, right? And it also works off of 12, 10, 8, and 6. However, the dice, there's no stats. Whatever dice you're rolling is based on the hit points you have. So 40 to 30 is a D12. If you go down past that, it's a D10. Then it's a D6.
That's pretty cool.
Then it's a D6.
Yeah, vicious cycle. Yeah,
I like that.
The only thing you do is you roll a 5 to stay alive. If you roll a 5 or better, whatever you have to do, you do. That's it. No stats. Weapons, you roll your whatever dice you're rolling on, and then you add the violence rating for that weapon, and that's it. And then we have a thing where the zombies, if that's because you're going to face off a zombie, you face off a militia, so you don't roll to hit. You're essentially rolling your damage. But zombies essentially, if they catch you and they bite you, you get infected, and you automatically lose whatever dice you're at. So if you're at 40 and you're rolling a D12, you get bit by a zombie twice, you're down to a D8, and now you're infected. And you will, when you die, you will turn unless you get the cure. That is stashed away at the big box store. But like, it's a story that I wanted to tell, but we couldn't figure out a way to do it with action, or to do it in a way that worked with action. But now it's an open world zombie survival adventure.
Oh, that's sick.
So is that coming to Kickstarter, or is that
TBD? No, we are going to just release it hopefully in August or September. It's written, it's at the editor right now. Most of the artwork is done. I'm just waiting on getting the cover and waiting on getting some maps. Brian lays it out, and we wanted to do something that, because Brian is laying it out and I'm writing it, and I'm not getting paid to write it, obviously, we could pay the artists and then just produce it and start selling it at conventions and pre-orders and stuff like that. And you know, it feels good to be able to know what it costs me to make an action book, and to be able to make something awesome for a fraction of the cost that I don't have to go to Kickstarter for.
Yeah, that's the dream, really. For me, that's the quote unquote air quotes dream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to not beg for money. Whew.
Yeah. Somehow you got the money in advance or something, like some other industry. One day. Well, I wanted to go back. We have to wrap up soon, but I wanted to go back to something you said about system, because we were talking with Mark Diaz-Truman about the Apocalypse, Power by the Apocalypse, because I also I'm a big fan of Apocalypse World, and that was really mind-blowing when that I remember that the first edition came out. And then later many other books, as you say, but some in particular, Tremulous, Cartel, that have stuck with me, that's sort of
Cartel,
not as famous games, but like they're really good uses of that same system, and so different from the original, D. Vincent Baker, Mad Max kind of vibe. But it's something that we had a good talk about, like, why new systems at all? What do you need? How do you bring people into the hobby? Too many systems might be bad. What's like the happy medium? And I definitely think, again, it's been a good kind of challenge, and something we've talked about more and more over the years, but we definitely moved toward a system that enabled different kinds of things. And I've actually seen it open up and change and mutate with our second game, Blister Critters, and now with Danse Macabre. So we have sort of versions where it's always, your scores are dice, and you have a pool of grit you burn to, you can use to boost rolls. And that's kind of it. That's the core mechanic. But what that represents can kind of mean different things, because the intelligence of a cartoon rat and the intelligence of a sort of space mutant, mercenary are sort of different things, and have different use cases. And yet, in a weird way, we could have all these characters. I mean, you could have Zombie Tentacle Chevalier from, the 1400 meeting up with Mutant Rat meeting up with Space Marine, and they could all have some sort of interaction because of the system. And I think that was not ever like a goal, but I think it's been interesting to see how that what kinds of stories you get when you do play within the same sandbox as opposed to reinventing. But it's interesting as you're saying that there are some constraints there. So I'll be curious to follow your first non 321 book in a while, or collaboration, and see what that looks like. All to say, it's after 8. I think we should wrap it up, but
sure.
John, do you want to maybe end on any plugs, anything people should know to look out for in addition to Brain Eaters, which obviously I love the idea that the cure is stored in like Walmart or whatever. So I'm curious to know about
it's just like, God damn it, of course it is.
Well, what it is the government sets up these things they call waiting rooms at big box stores.
Oh, yeah.
Right, because if you've ever been to a big box store like a Costco, if you really think about it, you could fortify one of those places pretty easily.
You really could.
And you'd have a lot of great supplies, room on the roof for things to get dropped off. But it's an experimental cure, and then you roll on a D12, and 3 of them, you get the one boring one is that you just get cured. And then yeah, I know. Then there's 8 of them that cure you but give you a cool mutation, and 3 of them that don't cure you but they kill you really badly. So there's always that. It always has to be a risk reward thing, and mutations, man, I love it. Anytime I can put a mutation in the game, dude, sign me up. Yeah, but same. Plugs. Check out 321actiongames.com. There is links to where you get our books and Drive Through RPG on itch. At Exalted Funeral if you want to get some awesome physical books that will come with the PDFs. And I think some of our books are on sale right now over there as well. Keep an eye out for Brain Eaters. If you follow me at John McGuire RPG across social media, I will be definitely talking about Brain Eaters. You want to learn how to play action? Probably by the time this episode drops on podcast, there will be links on 321actiongames.com to sign up for Eventbrite to play action with me every Tuesday for the month of July to start. Then we're going to see where that goes. Right. I would say if you're looking for other cool things to play, check out Neon Lords. If you like BX style play but want something very futuristic and He-Man-esque, I would check out Neon Lords of the Toxic Wasteland. If you're looking for something a little more lo-fi and really kitschy, weird, and interesting, get over to Get Haunted Industries and check out Weird Heroes of Public Access. And if you like music, I did release a single with Delirium Division. It's over on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever music's found. It's called Little Pink Houses. Go listen to that. That's pretty cool. We recorded that over the pandemic as well.
Nice.
That's awesome. Dudes, thank you so much for having me. This is a blast.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for coming on. This has been a super enlightening and fun conversation for me. I don't want to speak for Wythe, but I feel like I could in this instance.
I think you can. And yeah, I mean, we're all in the greater, the Metroplex, right? The Northeast. So we will be able to interact at Yield cons.
I hope to see you guys out and about.
Be a PAX, So we'll all meet up. Anyone who wants to meet up, we're doing more or the same cons as last year, but we're doing the cons again.
We're making a concerted effort to do con stuff.
Yeah. Maybe with some special, things to buy or trade. So we'll see. We'll see what we can get printed. But John, thanks so much for making time. We'll have to have you back on to talk more about games in the future for season 2. Thanks for helping us round out season 1 here of Why We Roll. Thanks to everybody who listens to this. We're conniving. That's right. We're straight up conniving. This is Why We Roll, right? Talking to other designers, hearing their stories, talking about systems, and thinking about what the fun of the stochastic or whatever nature of dice, the random nature of dice, and also what is or I don't know dwell on all the isn't and the negative, but what is punk and what is indie and all that. So thanks, John, and we'll look out for your stuff.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. I'm gonna click end stream.
Thanks, everybody.